Ex-prisoners of Reddit. What was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month in, I watched a crip-on-crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60 plus times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help. But nobody could, because you would be a target next. He somehow survived, but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. Story 2. I made a friend early on who was sentenced to life for murdering a man that had touched his niece. He'd been locked up for about 5 or 6 years when I'd first met him. Talked to him every day for 3 years. And one day he comes up to me and says he needs to talk to me about something. We do a lap on the back 40 and he tells me that his old lady is leaving him and isn't bringing his daughter up to come see him anymore. He's actually crying. I didn't know what I could do to help him, so I let him cry and told him to not let it bother him. Maybe she'll come around. We go on about our day and everything seems normal. That night he woke me up, he bunked across the hall, crying. I got up to talk to him and he says that he wants to die, and that he's glad I'm up because he doesn't want to be alone. I start hitting the panic button for my cell and screaming for a guard, but no one comes. I have to watch while he pries his mirror off his wall. He put on his linens and blanket like a big robe, and he cuts his stomach with his mirror. It was hard to see much because of the blankets and the dark, but I could smell his blood. Then he lit his blankets on fire. The COs got there when the smoke alarm went off, but they were too late. I still have nightmares about it, screaming for him to stop, to just talk it out, but he never did. I've seen a lot of screwed up stuff, man, but this was probably the worst. Or at least it stuck with me the longest. I gotta ask, what's the point of a panic button if it doesn't seem to work? But I guess COs aren't exactly known for caring about prisoners very much, so I guess that's that. Story 3. I turned 6 months into 3 years of juvie time. While not really bad, this one kid supposedly fell in the shower and hit his head. Not sure if it was a planned ruse, but after he came back from the hospital, he suddenly forgot how to talk and lost his memory. He'd communicate with whimpers. This went on for a few weeks. Every month you'd go in for evaluation and your remaining time and your progress would be reviewed. I'm assuming he thought this act would get him sent home. The staff eventually grew tired of it, and in his review told him since he didn't remember anything, he would have to do all of his time over again, because he obviously hadn't learned anything to be rehabilitated. His memory miraculously returned that day. Edit of how 6 months turned into 3 years. I went in for burglary at 16. The sentence was a 6-month program, kinda like a boys' summer camp in the middle of the woods. They had a point system where you would start with 650 points at the beginning of the week. You would earn or lose points based on your behavior. You'd gain points for doing chores and behaving, or lose them by fighting and other stupid stuff. Above 650 points was a positive week, and you'd get candy and extra privileges like movie night and field trips. Less than 650 was negative, so throughout your sentence they kept track. If you didn't have enough positive weeks when you went to your review, you would get more time. My home life sucked, and I wound up having fun hanging out with the other boys and finally being able to be a kid. The food was good, I was smart and maxed out the placement tests, so I didn't really have to do schoolwork. Ended up doing enough stupid stuff to wind up at the first program a year. After a year, you go back to the juvenile detention center and they reassess your needs and send you to another program, as they can keep you until you're 18 if they want to. Just didn't think I was rehabilitated. I spent another year at another program, same kind of stuff, but pushed a staff member, caught a charge, and got sent to adult jail because I had just turned 18. Spent a year in the county and was free after. It's definitely not an ideal situation when someone feels that spending 3 years in juvie is preferable over their home life. OP, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I hope things are working out better now. Story 4. I spent 8 years in prison in the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of holding and hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown/search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and butt. Story 5. I remember people kinda turned on each other out of boredom. I mean, you made friends and all, but you had it hanging over you that you were a bad guy. And some people took to being jerks and provoked others seemingly out of boredom. It was an unpleasant situation to be on the other side of, because you wanted to stay out of trouble too, but at the same time had to stand up for yourself. Maybe not the absolute worst I saw, but something I remember. Story 6. It's not the craziest thing I saw, but it's a social norm in prison that goes on daily. I'll never forget how socially acceptable jackers were. Like somebody would be wearing a coat or hoodie, etc., and stare at a female CO and pleasure themselves. Sometimes sitting on a bench, sometimes the TV room, and nobody bats an eye. One time a dude was like, "Hey man, can you move a row over? She knows I'm watching." And didn't skip a beat, cranking off to an ugly 60-something-year-old woman. It's screwed up, but after a while you just accept that some people went nuts in there. Story 7. Done 11 years myself. One of the worst things I've seen is two members of a gang called Goodfellas, aka 40 Deep, jumped on a blood on the way back from pill call. One used a large knife. The other had a fan motor in a net bag and used that as a flail. Also seen/heard multiple people being assaulted. A friend of mine admitted to me after a year or so that he'd been actively assaulted every night by his roommate for about a 5-month period. Story 8. Not a prisoner, but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison GP. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical, blah blah, and the guy was about to leave. The GP mentoring me said, "Hey, check out his colostomy real quick." The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off and he had these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused and the guy left super quick. GP just shrugged. Later that day I asked the GP what was up. Apparently the other prisoners bang that guy's colostomy hole, and he had gotten an STI of the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. Well, this is probably the most disgusting thing we're gonna find in here. I am sorry to everyone who has ears right now, or who just has eyes and is watching the screen. It is a bad day to be able to perceive things. Story 9. Saw a dude get his face turned to hamburger over a card game. Dude lost, so he sucker punches the guy across from him a minute later, gets on top of him and probably gets about 10 hits in by the time the CO broke it up. Blood everywhere. I was like, holy crap. It was my first month in there and it kind of made me not want to leave the cell. My bunkie was a blood and jacked. He's like, "Dude, no one will screw with you." And I'm like, okay, I hope not. I'm pretty sure he smashed his eye socket in. Story 10. My uncle was in for 17 years for marijuana-related charges. He was in a ward with two other guys with the same name as him, both of them in for 7 years. One of them murdered a guy and the other was a child toucher. One day when my uncle was in the showers, a group of guys had mistaken him as the child toucher and were about to serve prison justice on the wrong guy. He quickly realized the situation, sprinted naked out of the showers to grab his papers, and showed the guys they have the wrong dude. Story 11. Coworker of mine here in Delaware during a riot got his teeth stomped in, and while he lay there bleeding, some of the dudes on death row surrounded a female guard and protected her from all the other dudes who wanted to assault her. Honor among thieves. How about it? They actually got their sentences reduced, I believe. Not the worst, but I hope it's uplifting. Honestly, OP, thank you so much. We could use something a little uplifting here. I'm surprised it was people on death's row too, because usually they're like, well, we have nothing to lose, so who cares? But no, it seems that people even destined to die, as it were, still have some level of morals to them. It's either that or they were just hoping to be taken off death row, which is fair enough. Story 12. I worked in the medical department of a large prison in Florida. We had an inmate bite a bigger inmate's nose off, or at least the tip. The bigger guy kept asking the little guy to bang, and the little guy had had enough. We saw several stabbings, several were life-flighted out, but those weren't the most interesting. We had an inmate smoke some bad spice made out of God knows what. He came to medical out of his mind and later died because it caused brain hemorrhaging. One guy got a dislocated patella and was just sitting patiently as I got his info. I asked if it hurt, and he said, yeah. I asked how he was so chill, and he replied, "'Cause I'm not a coward." Story 13. I did 3 years inside HMP Belmarsh when I was 18, having just transferred out of YOI Cookham Wood. I was in for a non-violent but serious offense, so I was put on HB1 with all the lifers. I saw a lot of stuff go sideways quickly there. Dudes having heads cracked in with pool balls out of nowhere in the lunch queue, but that all became pretty commonplace. What I will never forget is the feeling of surprise as 3 guys push past me on the stairs, and wonder what the hurry was. Then watching them all barrel into a single cell, still not sure what was going on. The screams that came from that room were horrific. It turns out they held down the guy, a big dude too, on his bed, threw boiling water on him and repeatedly stabbed him. We all heard the screams, but no one would alert a guard. It isn't done. Then from my spot on the stairs next to the cell, I watched a guard walk over. His name was Mr. D-Bag. He saw what was going on through the window and the door. He turned around and walked off. Jerk doesn't describe him well enough. Story 14. Saw a lot of bad things, like the usual fights, couple people dying and such. One of the most screwed up things I saw was what the guards did to this one inmate. I was in maximum security, and then there was a super max segment of that, which was all tiny single cells to hold the murderers, high-profile cases, and complete nut jobs that are too dangerous for general population. So I was a trustee doing my rounds handing out lunch to these single cells. This one guy demands an extra sandwich from me. I tell him it's not happening because I don't have extra. And he starts throwing stuff, including who knows what liquid on me. Well, the guard sees this, and I was cool with them because I never acted up or anything. Then he gets on his radio and calls for their special response team. Maybe 1 to 2 minutes max, 12 dudes in full riot gear come walking down the hallway, marching and banging their clubs on their shields like something out of a movie. They let me stand there for some reason. All 12 of them somehow fit into the 6x10 cell and just beat the living crap out of this guy. The guard tells me he will handle the rest of handing out lunch. I go back to my cell near the indoor guard office, and about 5 minutes later they bring this battered dude down. They have what's called a restraining chair, which straps your ankles, legs, waist, wrists, head, and neck all down. The guy gets promptly put into it and then rolled outside to the yard about 50 feet away. Promptly gets maced. It was 36 degrees that night, but apparently they have a rule that they can keep you out there as long as it doesn't hit freezing. They left this guy out there for a solid 12 hours with no food or water and barely any clothes. I saw him again 4 to 5 days later after he got out of the hospital/medical. One eye swollen shut, the other barely opened and beaten beyond recognition. He called me over to his cell and apologized. Appreciate the guards for looking out for me, but I felt a bit bad for what they did to him. I just want to say that there's no psychological evidence at all that what the guards did here would ever prevent bad behavior in the future. If anything, it is more likely to make the person more violent or more resentful, just more dangerous in general. So yeah, correctional system sucks, is what I'm saying. Story 15. I've never been to prison, but my cousin has, and he came back all sorts of messed up. He was arrested for drugs. According to him, he spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement for his safety. He said that his first couple of months there were okay as far as prison goes. But one day, for whatever reason, some guy who had been kept separate from the general population was accidentally put with the rest of the prisoners, unsupervised. And a few prisoners grabbed the guy and stomped on his elbows and legs to break them before they sodomized him with some shivs. My cousin said that those guys did it all in an instant, and they threatened him if he snitched. My cousin was later interviewed by some of the guards before they took the guys who did this, and so some thought that he had snitched. He says that he didn't, but that didn't matter, because the guards had put him in solitary for safety, and was eventually kept there for months longer, all because he wouldn't snitch, and they tried to accuse him of being an accomplice. Story 16. I told this story last year when this exact question was asked, so here's the retelling. I spent a couple weeks in county jail. On the first day, we were all being processed into the facility, stripped, bent over, spread your cheeks, cough, and we were all told very succinctly to never ever even joke about unaliving yourself in the facility. Kinda like how you don't say bomb on an airplane anymore. By day 3, I had a good understanding of the guys I was locked up with. I was physically the biggest of the white guys in our pod, so all the white kids huddled around my table at meals to keep away from the Hispanic folks and the black folks. Yes, there are 3 teams in correctional facilities whether you like it or not. There was one kid in the group that seemed underdeveloped mentally. He probably had a learning disability among other things, but he essentially acted 12 years old. I knew early on he was going to get himself in trouble because he never stopped talking or moving, and he was rubbing everyone the wrong way. I tried to tell him to chill out and be invisible, but he was not understanding what I told him. I had been there a week when the 12-year-old finally lost his cool completely. He was in the shower singing and joking around, putting on a performance that went too far, and he pooped on the floor as a joke. After the other guys in the shower grabbed their towels and ran, he proceeded to kick the poop all over the walls and into the other shower stalls. I didn't shower for the rest of my stay, truth be told. It turned into a big scene. And then when the trustees came in to clean up the poop all over the walls, it turned into an even bigger scene. The whole time, the 12-year-old was locked in a cell near the showers, laughing and joking as other inmates had to clean up his poop and make the shower area sanitary again. State-run facilities have standards after all. The next day, everyone was looking at the 12-year-old with hate in their eyes. Everyone missed their showers the day prior due to the poopsident. And then the kid was still up to his antics at breakfast the next day. Everyone got really cold toward him, even openly mean. I'll admit, I started ignoring him completely after the poop. It took him a day or two to realize he was hated by all, and then his personality changed dramatically. He became sad, despondent, and started talking to the COs, because the other inmates wouldn't talk to him anymore. He screwed up, and told the COs that he should just harm himself and make everyone happy. And that was all it took. They dragged out the Blue Burrito. This is the scariest thing I had seen in jail. The Blue Burrito was a 10-foot-long blue foam mat, like you would use in gym class, with two 12-foot-long red belts attached. They laid it out on the floor, forced the 12-year-old to lay on the mat, and then rolled him up with his arms at his sides into the Blue Burrito. The two long red belts clipped together at the top and bottom of the burrito, keeping it all nice and tight. This was the protocol for self-unalive threats at the jail. No counseling, no medical ward. You lose the ability to move. They put that poor bastard in the burrito around 8 p.m., dragged him into his cell, and left him laying on the floor wrapped up tight until breakfast the next morning, around 8 a.m. Imagine being unable to move, barely able to breathe, with no end in sight for 12 hours on the floor of your 8x8 cell. My cell was up above his, and I heard him weeping and moaning in agony all night. He didn't say a word to anyone, or look anyone in the eye for that matter, for the rest of the time I was there. One night in the Blue Burrito broke him. Ah yes, this sounds like an excellent solution. I don't know why they don't do this everywhere. I think every therapist should have a Blue Burrito in their office, just ready to go. Think of all the problems that will definitely be solved by this. Mental health is already taken as a joke in a lot of society, although it's getting better. It surprises me exactly zero that prisons have it way, way worse. In some prisons, it seems like the inmates are hardly treated as human. So it's no surprise that their solution to making someone not unalive themselves is to just make it so they can't, with no other recourse at all. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, or maybe learned something, or got something out of it at least. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.